Welcome back to Beautifully Complex, everyone. I'm so glad you're here. And I have with me today Kelli Fetter of Handwriting Solutions. And we're going to talk about writing challenges, dysgraphia, but also other challenges, and how I hope to kind of identify when this might be what's going on with your kid, when it might be more of a learning disability, and also 5 things that you can do right now that are going to help a kid who's struggling with writing. Kelli, thank you for being here. Will you start by sharing who you are and what you do?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for having me, Penny. So again, yeah, my name's Kelli. I am the founder of Handwriting Solutions, and I'll start kind of at the beginning because I think it helps knowing where I came from. So I originally went down the path of I'm a pediatric occupational therapist. And so I worked in pediatrics for many years, seeing a variety of students in their schools, outpatient, early intervention. And so I had a pretty good broad exposure to a variety of kiddos. And then I had my own. And and then shifted over to an adjunct professor position, also teaching kinesiology and pediatrics. So I loved that academia world and that research world. But life pretty much shifted when my daughter was 5 and started to struggle with reading and writing. And
Mm.
my OT brain said, what is going on? How can I help? How did this even happen? But I came at it from a very medical model. And I was like, well, her motor skills are fine. Her fine motor skills are great. I don't understand. Her visual spatial skills were through the roof. I don't understand what's going on. And so of course, I go to the school and I'm like, I'm seeing a disconnect. And they're like, she's fine. We're going to wait and see, typical
Hmm.
response that we get.
Yep.
But given what I knew early intervention matters. And so we started tutoring when she was between kindergarten and first grade that summer and really focusing on the reading skills because I knew we had to make some gains there before we started first grade. And she was just things were not connecting; they were not clicking into place. First grade rolls around, and then the school says, "Oh my goodness, we've got to get all of these evaluations done, and she needs to do OT, and she needs to do speech, and she needs to do get a neuropsych." And then I hit the parent overwhelm, which I know some of our listeners may be familiar with this.
So many. Hmm.
Uh-huh. And I just I still could not get my head wrapped around, and obviously during this full time too, I was really honing in on how I can help her with her handwriting skills because that was something that I at least knew a little bit about as an OT. Um, so I said, I just need to get her evaluated first. I need to know what we're working with because all of this other stuff I can't wrap my head around, and we need to go about this in a way that makes sense. So I am the biggest proponent of evaluations. I think it just gives families so much useful information about how a child learns. And so that was my first step. It was probably like November of her first grade year. And turns out, yes, dyslexia, dysgraphia. Um, so get this, Penny. I had never heard of dysgraphia before. I was an
Yeah.
OT practicing in pediatrics, and I had
Wow.
never heard of dysgraphia before. And
That's crazy.
so it is, right? It's very alarming. And I would venture to say most of her teachers in her school didn't really understand it either. And so I said, I've got to figure this out. I was on a mission. Meanwhile, we went ahead and started her in a very intensive dyslexia remediation programming that spring of her first grade, which also happened to coincide with COVID. So that was fun.
Mm.
But I was like, let's tackle this. I'm gonna research. I'm gonna learn. I'm gonna take any course, any training. I just did a huge deep dive in the dysgraphia piece, and then was able to support her and started building her skills and coming at it from a different model than what I was used to as an OT. And here we are today. She's in 7th grade and no longer qualifies for dyslexia or dysgraphia diagnosis. So we have come
Wow.
full circle. But
Yeah.
all of that to say, as the years went by, I I was able to help her and see her progress, and I thought, why is nobody else doing this? And these kids need help. Maybe I should help bridge the gap for these students. And so what started as a very small 2 afternoons a week is gonna be just like a little like side gig that I was gonna help some friends out. Here we are, fully virtual, providing dysgraphia and dyslexia remediation worldwide. So
Isn't
big,
the
big one
internet
story.
amazing?
It really
Right?
is.
Yeah. Yeah. And I came into this work the same way. I never thought about any of these things. I didn't really, what I came to know is that I knew nothing about ADHD. I knew nothing about autism because I only knew what the general public understanding was. I knew nothing about dysgraphia. Hadn't even heard it before either. Oh, I don't have any formal training where it might have been helpful and I should have learned it, but like I just didn't know anything. Executive function, didn't know that term either. And I've run across over the years so many educators who don't know these things also, who've never heard of them also, because they don't have to take any training in special education in any form or fashion in order to become a teacher. So it's not that they don't care, it's that they don't know that they need to know.
Mhm.
Right. And then, yeah. And so, like, we went to OT for dysgraphia. So it does sort of boggle my mind that you were an OT and didn't know what dysgraphia was. I
Mhm.
guess we lucked out and we went somewhere where they knew what dysgraphia was. But I found it really challenging all the way through my son's school career because people didn't understand it and because they didn't like a lot of the accommodations that were going to be helpful. They didn't want to
Mhm.
go there. They still wanted to force him to handwrite things a lot. And so it was really challenging. But I think we need to start with making sure that everybody listening understands what is dysgraphia.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, because that's you can't address it unless you understand it. And
Hmm.
so, yeah, so dysgraphia, what I like to think of is specific learning disabilities are it's an umbrella term. And so you have the specific learning disability in reading, and so that's this dyslexia. You have the specific learning disability in writing, so that's dysgraphia, and then you have it in math, and that's the dyscalculia. And so most people know about the dyslexia one, the
Yes.
SLD and reading, but the other two not so much, right? Um, and so what does dysgraphia actually look like? This is where it gets really tricky and really challenging because there is not a gold standard tool to evaluate for dysgraphia. And there is not really great diagnostic criteria for dysgraphia. So if you were to say, look at the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, you're going to see a very broad definition. Same thing with the IDEA or the ICD-10. Those are all diagnostic criteria and tools that someone like a psychologist would look at when giving a diagnosis. But they're all very broad, and there's not a clear tool or assessment tool to use. So that's tricky because then kids either slip through the cracks or maybe be misdiagnosed. There's a lack of understanding with that. So with all of that said, the biggest thing that I personally look for now, we do not do diagnostics. OTs are not not in our scope of practice to diagnose. So we refer out to that, but we can certainly say if your child is showing some red flags. And so some of those might be the obvious one, the messy, illegible handwriting. That's the
Hmm.
one we see often on those Facebook groups where parents are in there and they're like, does this look like my kid has dysgraphia? And they show a picture. And if only that was that easy. Yes, it is helpful for us to see a child's output, but even more helpful is to see them as they're as they're completing that output and to kind of get a more holistic view of their learning. But yes, definitely that messy, illegible writing. Maybe it's the formation of their letters or the sizing or the spacing that can be challenging for them. A big one is that difficulty translating their thoughts to paper.
Mhm.
So there's that barrier there. Some of our dysgraphic students actually have really nice, neat handwriting. And it's that written expression piece, that getting our thoughts out. That's the most challenging part. Some students might struggle with sentence skills, capitalization, punctuation, grammar. Some dysgraphic students struggle with spelling. So there's a bit of an overlap there with dyslexia and dysgraphia in the spelling part, which again is why I want to see that holistic learning profile of a student. Um, and then one of the bigger red flags that I see is frustration around writing and avoidance of writing. If your child
Mm.
is really frustrated, ripping up the paper, this was my child, ripping up the
Mine too.
paper and crumpling it and throwing it at you,
Mhm.
and there might be something going on. Maybe not dysgraphia, but something that you would want to further explore. And then that avoidance too. We see that sometimes in schools, the avoidance of anything, the meltdowns around writing. That's not really behavior. I know, we talk a lot about behavior, and I know you do in this podcast, but it is telling us that there's something more that's going on.
Mhm.
And then there's those soft skills, the pencil grasp. We're looking at that because that can sometimes be tricky. If the child is experiencing fatigue or discomfort with writing, that is something we want to look at too. So you can see a dysgraphic student is going to look very different from another dysgraphic student because the signs and symptoms, they're there's a lot going on, and there's a lot going on in the brain when we do write, right? Writing by hand is so complex. And so it's figuring out where that breakdown and barrier is happening for the student so that then we can build up their skills.
Yeah, and really understanding, like really having somebody help me to sit back and think about all the things that are going on in the brain and the body when we are writing something down really helped me understand the fact that for some it's completely just automatic. We don't think about it, we just do it. And for others, it's too much. It's too many things at one time. We can't manage. And as you mentioned with your daughter earlier, my son also has amazing fine motor skills, which I assumed as we were walking into this journey, his motor skills were going to be terrible. And I was shocked to find that they were not. Um, and hand-eye coordination is unbelievable. He now he likes to play rhythm games, like video games with rhythm. And there is one that he's been playing for years. And when I watch him play, I'm in shock and awe when he plays these games. He can go so fast. You have to hit different keys for different things that are going, right? And he will get 99% of these things with hundreds of them just blasting through really fast. And I'm like, holy cow. And then I'm like, what can we do with this skill? Which we have not
No.
figured out yet. But like, it's not affecting everything the way you would think it would, right? Like it
Yeah.
really is more about the writing, either the physical act of writing or that written expression piece, putting your thoughts together, getting them on paper, expanding on them. Like my son wouldn't necessarily avoid writing altogether, but he would write as little as he thought he could possibly get away with. And then he would always be asked to edit. And then he would get really upset and he
Yeah.
would not edit. Right.
Yeah.
And
And
so
then we
that was a
spiral.
real sign. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And then there's that spiral. And
Hmm.
so, yeah, a lot of assistive technology came in for us. But what I noticed was that he was never taught letter formation.
Hmm.
And I feel like if he had been taught letter formation at the beginning, it wouldn't be as bad as it has
Hmm.
been
Bingo.
because every single letter that he writes, I'm like, that's an interesting way to do that, right? All of them. And he did a lot of handwriting without tears at OT. He did a lot of practicing trying to change the letter formation, and it just wouldn't stick. What stuck is what he made up at the beginning because he wasn't taught.
Hmm.
And I don't know why we're not teaching that in school now.
Oh, I know. I could really get on my soapbox here.
Uh-huh.
But the biggest thing I want to point out is yes, handwriting is more than a fine motor skill, and we have got to understand that from a teacher perspective, from an OT perspective, and from a parent perspective. And something I talk a lot about is that cognitive load of writing. So I love that you brought that up. Is their handwriting is so complex, and so when a student is having to think about how to form a letter, how to remember to how to place it on the line and the correct spacing. Oh, but yeah, then we also have to think about how to spell the word and what makes a good sentence again, and what did I want to write about anyway, and what was the topic, and then you can see the spiral because every part of it is challenging. The cognitive load is too heavy for them. And so, yes, if we could front load it and have good, high quality, explicit, and systematic instruction in school, embedded in the school day, it does not take much time. I think that's the key there is the research supports does not take a ton of time in that classroom day to provide this good quality handwriting instruction. All students are going to benefit, but particularly our dysgraphic students. And sure, they may need a little bit more, even beyond that instructional, that tier one approach, if you will, if you're in public school systems. But it's kind of like with dyslexia, the pendulum have swung back to more of a phonics-based instruction in reading, and it's benefiting all students. And it's especially benefiting students with dyslexia, and students with dyslexia still probably need some outside support too to really spend more time on the phonological awareness or the phonemic proficiency. Same thing with dysgraphia. Ideally, we're getting that really quality instruction in the school. And then, yes, we may need some outside support to help bridge the gaps and help kind of eliminate some of those barriers for the child.
Yeah, I mean, 18 years ago, my kid entered kindergarten, and they expected him to already know how to form all of his letters. They assume that kids are going to preschool and they're learning it there. And I'm like, what? Like, that doesn't make sense to me, you know? That's
Mhm.
not a requirement. That doesn't make sense. So anyway, these things happen. And I think it's really hard to identify early. Like if your kid is 4 and they're not writing yet, you don't know that they have dysgraphia to go ahead and start working on letter formations with them before
Right.
they go to school. So it's a really tricky timing there. And I think just a lot of kids end up in school, then we realize, okay, there's a problem here.
Yeah, yeah,
So
or it's late elementary before we realize it because the demands are then above what they kind of
yeah.
they fake their way through. They've masked a little bit. They've compensated. They've avoided, and so then you hit fourth, fifth grade, and the expectations have just really
Mhm.
grown, and then it all starts crumbling and falling apart. And I see this a lot with spelling and that written expression piece too because some of these kids are really good memorizers. And
Oh,
so,
yeah.
then you get to, longer passages that you need to write and more complex words, and it falls apart, and then we have to go
Mhm.
back to those foundations because those foundations were just, never built or not for long enough.
Yeah, I just had a little aha when you said that because my kid is a great speller, but he had to do it verbally. And now I'm thinking, no, he was a great memorizer. He learned how to spell it and it stuck and he could repeat it, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so maybe he wasn't the best speller. We always thought, well, you just couldn't read it to tell if he had spelled it right or not. And he had the
yeah,
most amazing first grade teacher who would let him take the test like everybody else did. But then if there was something she wasn't sure about, she wouldn't just mark it wrong. She would ask him to spell it verbally. And he would get 100s on every spelling test until they stopped doing spelling tests, like, because he
mhm.
was able to just memorize it.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep, yep.
Wow.
These kids are just they
Mhm.
are master, like, compensators. It's
Yeah,
so
yeah.
interesting, but I do like that strategy. I think that's a great, accommodation that schools can make, and that even at home that you can make is that verbal versus written, to see if they truly understand the skill and if it's just that writing component. And then, I think a good test of spelling is like to throw in those nonsense words. And that really is your good sign of are they truly able to decode and encode those words? Or are they just taking that little snapshot in their brain and
Yeah.
reverberating it?
Yeah. And kids who are extremely verbally fluent, like my kid is off the chart verbally fluent, can sit down at a piece of paper and have no capability of writing something. And those two things can coexist at the same time, which I think was really part of his struggle in school was when I talked to him about this, oh my gosh, he blows me away. But then when he writes about it, it feels like he's being lazy because he's just not
Mhm.
living up to that standard that he showed me verbally, right? We would
Yeah.
always have those comparisons or intelligence, kids who are gifted can struggle to write something. Those
Yeah.
two things can coexist. I think it's really important that everybody understand that. And so if you're met with educators, professionals, people who are saying, no, they're showing us this ability over here, you have the knowledge to push back on that. You have the knowledge to keep asking questions, to go to the next person, to get it figured out for your kid. I'm not saying don't believe everyone, but kind of like if you feel it in your gut,
Mhm.
then keep going, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. The mismatch is very common, I think, in children with dysgraphia, the mismatch of ability and performance. And that's where the frustration comes in. So when I mentioned earlier that is so frustrating to be able to verbally communicate and share your
Yeah.
amazing ideas and then just come up to this like brick wall of when you go to write. Like I can't even imagine how frustrating that would be. And I
Hmm.
love that you mentioned that, schools too. I think something that I've observed over the years as well is sometimes in the school systems, they take a zoomed out approach. And so on average, your child might be performing okay because we're zoomed out, but we have to zoom in to see the big picture. Same thing with even just interpreting different assessments. If your child has had an assessment through the school, outside of the school, if we look at that composite score, that's not always going to give us great information. But I want to zoom in to these individual scores and see exactly what is happening, and likely you're going to see that spiky profile of strength and then barrier, strength and barrier.
Yeah. Yeah. Very asynchronous.
Okay.
Very asynchronous. So let's dive into 5 things that parents or educators can do right now. We are starting to run up against our time limit here for folks to be able to have enough time to listen in between all of the busy stuff they're doing. So, do you
Okay.
want to start with the first one?
Absolutely. Yeah. The first one I think we've alluded to. So be aware. If you are a parent, be aware. If you're the teacher, be aware. If we can be empowered as parents, especially, and monitor our child's development as best as possible. I mean, we all don't have to be writing experts or dysgraphia experts, but just being aware and monitoring and noticing any gaps or noticing any frustrations, that's gonna be huge. And so part of that I can absolutely share with the listeners is that we've created sort of an expectations because again, most parents we're not gonna know what to even expect at each grade level. So we created just a super easy PDF basically that shows the parents exactly what to expect at each grade level so that they can ensure that their child is able to keep up, and if they're not, knowing what to do. Again, I think we know that early intervention is best and best practice. So I think knowing when progress is just not happening or it's slower than we expect, or just that gut, that gut feeling that's
Yeah.
that I felt, that I'm sure you felt, Penny, that a lot of our parents can relate to, of like just something is not clicking. Um, that awareness will be huge. Um, the second I would say is go ahead and start building those foundations. If you're a parent of a younger child, this is a perfect time. But even if your child is in middle school, it's not too late to go back to the foundations. I like to think of writing as kind of the tip of the iceberg. So what you see at the top of the iceberg is that output, right? But there's
Mhm.
so many foundational skills that have to happen to get to that tip of the iceberg. So really digging in, maybe it is a fine motor concern, or maybe it's a visual concern, or sensory, or attention, or executive function. All of these skills can certainly impact that writing eventually. So really working on building up those foundations is helpful. Um, Number three would be, as much as we can, bring in multisensory learning, because chances are your dysgraphic child, the comorbidity of ADHD or another SLD, is significantly high. And so we know that when we can engage students and really get them excited about learning and light up multiple senses, while we're learning, while we're having that explicit, systematic instruction and practice, that's going to be when like things start to click into place. That is going to get better gains and better outcomes and better progress. The research is very, very clear on that. So, and I'm happy to share more ideas with your listeners as well for what multisensory really looks like, because that could be a whole other podcast that we do.
Yeah,
If
yeah.
like what is quality instruction, and what is multisensory. So I'll leave my information at the end, and your listeners can certainly follow up to learn more about that too.
Perfect.
Um, yeah, and then number four would be that quality practice. So quality practice is not copy work. And I think
Hmm.
sometimes we forget that. Quality
Our
practice.
education system forgets it for sure.
Yeah. Quality practice looks very systematic, and we're explicitly teaching a child how to form a letter, where it sits on the line, what spacing, what sizing, what, capitalization, punctuation, all of those, again, that come kind of automatic to us as adults. Kids have to be explicitly taught. I think I was reading a research article the other day, and it said handwriting has to be taught, not caught. And I'm like, yes, their kids aren't
Mm,
gonna, I mean, if they do, it will be like your son, where, okay, well, we'll figure this out then. Let me draw. So you'll see students
hmm.
draw the letter instead of fluently, automatically write a letter. And if we don't have that foundational transcription skills, these higher cognitive level writing and written expression skills, it's just going to be 10 times harder on that student.
Putting it all into that mechanical part, right? And then
Exactly.
they don't have room for that written expression
Mhm.
piece,
Mhm.
maybe.
Yes.
Yeah, I think executive function challenges play a huge role
Mhm. Mhm.
in writing challenges.
It does. It really, really does. And I think part of it too is that automaticity, it's when we can automate the physical act of handwriting, then we don't have to think about it. And then we can
Hmm.
think about what we're writing and have, yeah, it kind of frees up some of our executive function
Yeah.
abilities.
And
Um,
in that number four piece that you were just talking about, like we had tools that we also added when we were trying to work on those mechanics, like raised line paper, um, pencil grips. There's a million different kind of pencil grips now, and we probably tried 10 or 12 before we found one that
yeah.
he felt comfortable with. So there's lots of things out there that can help you to facilitate. Highlighted every other
Mhm.
line paper was another one, and graph paper. Like we really leaned into some different papers to try to help with that. And it does some. And then he got old enough where he didn't want to have different paper, and then that became a thing, right? So,
Sure. Yeah.
there's always some sort of challenge and ebb and flow to what will work,
Yeah.
and changing things as you go.
Yeah, but I love those low tech accommodations. And I was just on a call with a parent right before this, and she asked that same question because she has a kiddo going into middle school, and like he doesn't want to look different, and I get
Hmm.
that. And I said, what I've done is I take 10 of them into the classroom, and so everybody gets access to this, so that it's not so exclusive. And let's be honest, if your kid is struggling, they're not the only kid in that classroom struggling.
No.
And
Yeah.
so I educate teachers a lot on like, have a variety of these tools, have a variety of paper types, because what works for one kid is not going to work for another kid as well. So it just makes for a nice, accessible classroom environment that's free from stereotypes and awkwardness for our students.
I love that. Yeah. I'm just thinking back, like, how many times could I have taken extra stuff in and made it easier? But also, it has to be received. Teachers have to be open to that, to allowing kids to choose what they want to do and use. And that isn't always the case, but we can try to educate.
Yes, exactly. Educate, advocate. Yeah, it certainly has to be an approachable environment for sure. And
Hmm.
one thing I tell parents a lot of times too, because I think there's this nervousness going into a new school year, of is this teacher going to get it? And there's this fear. And so I think every school that I've ever been in, because we have shuffled around some schools, um, I meet with the teachers before school even starts, and
Hmm.
I set the stage for what would be a collaborative environment. I come at it from a, here is how my child learns best. Here are her strengths. Here are her areas that might be challenging for her. Here's what has worked in the past. I am on this team as well. I want to collaborate. How can I support you as the teacher? And man, it just makes a big difference. And
Huge difference.
yeah, setting the stage for that whole school year. Again, will everybody be receptive? No, but I would say, given that little extra effort before the school year even starts, then they're not like blindsided, or they're not like, my child also has anxiety, so like we need to catch that before it, even
Hmm.
even comes to be a problem. So, um, yeah, I think the collaboration piece can be really, really helpful. And I guess that would kind of just segue into number 5, which is get outside help when you need it. So, of course, we want to utilize, especially for families who are in the public school systems, but even if you're in a private school, if you homeschool, we want to utilize as many resources as possible. But I will be the first to tell you that, as you alluded to, oftentimes teachers are not trained in dysgraphia or handwriting instruction. Most schools have removed handwriting instruction from curriculum, and most OTs in the school system are so bombarded with caseloads that, your student, especially these gifted kiddos, these 2E kiddos, these
Yeah.
dysgraphic kids, they're not qualifying for services in school oftentimes, because when we zoom out, we see that high IQ, and they're scraping by, they're academically. So sometimes it is worth getting extra outside support whenever your child hits that frustration point. And so what that looks like, it could look like a variety of things. It could look like therapy, OT, psychological therapy, mental health therapy. It could look like tutoring, specifically for handwriting or reading or spelling or written composition. It could look like vision therapy. It could look like executive function coaching. It could look like support for you as a parent. It can look like a lot of different things, but I promise that getting that outside support, you'll never regret that. And the earlier you get it, truly the better, because I've seen cases where, we put it off and we think the school's going to handle it, and we think just give them time. And I just have never seen a research article that supports that approach. So all of the
Right.
research is, early intervention um, makes a world of difference for these students, not only for their academic outcomes, but also for their mental health and their confidence.
But on the flip side, too, it's never too late. So for
Never too
people
late.
who have older kids
Yes.
and teenagers, like, it's never too late to. I get this question all the time as a parent coach. They will respond to something like a tip or a strategy or anything and say, "Well, my kid is this age. Is it too late?" It's never too late. We talk so much about early intervention that I think sometimes parents take away from that the message that it has to be early or it's not going to be useful. And that's not true. It's just ideal if it's early. It will be
Yeah.
different that way.
I
Yeah.
am so glad you said this, because I literally want a bumper sticker that says it's never too late to remediate.
Yes.
like my slogan. Um, and it's not. And so what I share is a pretty extreme example, but it's sometimes we need those extreme examples. Is it's like an adult, let's say an older adult, and they have a stroke. Are we going to just say, "Oh, sorry, you
Yeah.
had that brain damage," no, we're going to put them in therapy. We're going to teach them how to write again. Now, obviously, developmental dysgraphia is not an acquired brain injury, but our brains are plastic, and so we have worked with students in college. Um, we've worked with students in high school and middle school. I love that you mentioned it is never too late, because it truly isn't. You know, do we take a different approach? Perhaps. Um, we want to make it meaningful, and we want to have their buy-in and their motivation, because obviously that will impact outcomes. But with the right approach, we can make gain in adults. So, yeah, absolutely.
Amazing. So I have one last question for you before we wrap, which is, when do you add or shift to assistive technology? Because you're
Mhm.
talking a lot about learning the skills or relearning the skills, learning those foundations, changing the way they're doing things mechanically, maybe. When is it appropriate to add or shift to assistive technology?
Yeah, I get this question a lot. Same thing with the remediate too. I don't know why, if like third grade, if your kid has not learned handwriting by third grade, and I'm like, no, why is third grade? So what I will say is there's not a magic age for accommodation. And what I view accommodations, because I know that is like, well, if they haven't whatever, mastered handwriting, we have to move them to a keyboard. That's like the blanket statement. And oh my goodness, that is so false, because keyboarding is also equally challenging for our dysgraphic kids. So we can't just give them a keyboard and wish them the good luck, because they're probably going to struggle with that too. And they probably haven't had explicit and systematic instruction in keyboarding. So
Right, right.
I view accommodations as we can pull them in at any time. We can pull them in for the youngest learners if it bridges the gap for that student. So if we can pull in an accommodation that will take them from where they are now to accessing that education and that learning, that's when we're going to bring that accommodation in, whether it's a low-tech accommodation or a high-tech accommodation, like speech to text or predictive text or scribe, or again, the keyboarding piece. There's not so much a magic age as when do we need it to bridge that gap to help that student show their learning, demonstrate their learning, and access the education environment, which means that accommodations have to be so individualized. Um,
Mhm.
there is not one blanket accommodation that works for all dysgraphic students. That's why I like to really dig into their learning profile and see what is going to work, and maybe trial a few different accommodation tools and strategies for that student, because what works for one is just may not work for the other one. But yeah, hopefully that answered.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, I always think about, how can we help this child feel successful? We need
Hmm.
successes for kids to keep trying. So
Hmm.
while we're working on skills, is there something we can do to
Yes.
make them feel successful? Um, and again, not everybody is going to get on board with that all the time. I had to fight for, before
Mhm.
kids had computers in school, not dating myself or my kid, but I had to fight for an iPad. I had to fight for
Mhm.
years for an iPad for him because of a lot of executive function stuff, really. Like, he would complete a worksheet and he would lose it 4 times. He was doing assignments
Well,
4 or 5 times before he got credit for them. Like, this is not okay. We have to do something different here. But
yeah.
I think that's the key. Like, is there something we can do different that
Mhm.
is going to help this child feel successful, feel like this is doable, at least in the interim? Maybe it's not a long-term thing, but a lot of adults use voice to text. A lot of adults use,
Mhm.
that we type things now instead of handwriting everything. So avoiding that, I don't find useful either. For a long time, we couldn't get anything because it was, well, there's this study where if you write it by hand,
Mhm.
you remember it better. It does all these wonderful things for your brain.
But
But
if you
yeah,
can't
if
write,
writing
then
is easy for you,
yeah,
sure.
yeah,
Did they have kids with dysgraphia in that study?
right, right,
No, right? But
yeah.
that was like the understanding, the basis, their foundation that I was fighting against for so long.
Yes, yes. I think too that that makes me think of like we don't have to pick one. Like it can be both. It can
Mm,
be all. It
hmm.
can be all the things. We can be
Yeah.
remediating and accommodating and modifying. And we don't just have to pick one path, which I feel like sometimes in that like IEP 504, it feels
Hmm.
very much like you have to.
Yep.
But yeah, I advocate for all the things when the child needs it.
Perfect. Love it. Tell everybody where they can find you online so that they can connect and potentially learn more.
Sure. Our website is handwritingsolutions.org. My email is also kelli@handwritingsolutions.org. We're on Instagram and really all the social media platforms, but probably most active on the good old Instagram.
Mhm.
But certainly sign up for our emails because we uh, have a very active weekly email newsletter that is just absolutely full of information for parents and for teachers and for therapists. If you're a therapist listening too, we really want to support the entire team.
Amazing. I know so many people are going to stop listening and next time they're at the computer or their phone, right? The computer, their phone, they're going to look it up, right? And find what you offer and see if it might be helpful for their kid. Thank you for being here. I appreciate you coming on and sharing some of your expertise and some of your sort of been there, done that wisdom that I find so useful for parents, especially. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Penny. I love what you do. Keep doing it.
Thank you. I will see everybody in the next episode. Take good care.